Welcome or welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Brian Wickersham, Founding Partner and Design Director at AUX, and that's AUX, Architecture in Los Angeles, California. With more than 20 years of experience, he creates meaningful spaces that promote creativity and community. Bringing both rigor and spontaneity to his designs, he cultivates research and collaboration in his Los Angeles studio to produce bespoke architecture that best serves clients' needs. He likens this robust process to jazz, improvisational and collective. AUX Architecture's diverse body of work includes award-winning residential and multifamily homes, retail environments, art galleries, and education and cultural arts centers. A native of the Pacific Northwest, yay! Brian strives to mitigate architecture's impact on the environment. He integrates care and sustainability into all aspects of the studio. The project we will be talking about today is the Glorya Kaufman Performing Arts Center, located on the campus of Vista Del Mar Child and Family Services in Cheviot Hills, Los Angeles. The Glorya Kaufman Performing Arts Center is a beautifully reimagined space born from the remodel and expansion of a 1950s-era temple, located at the heart of Vista Del Mar's campus. The center is not just a building, but a beacon of innovation and inclusion, designed to be the home of Vista Del Mar's therapeutic performing arts program. Made from polycarbonate, its semi-translucent facade wraps around the building, and when illuminated at night, it turns into a glowing centerpiece for the campus. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome or welcome back to Detailed. My guest today is Brian Wickersham, Founding Partner and Design Director at AUX Architecture in Los Angeles, one of my favorite places to visit. The project we are going to talk about today is the Glorya Kaufman Performing Arts Center, located on the campus of Vista Del Mar Child and Family Services in Cheviot Hills, Los Angeles, which is the first time I've ever heard of that place. Brian, welcome to Detailed. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is your busy day to be here, especially on a Friday where we all want to sneakily fool around a little bit if we can.
Well, Friday before holiday as well, so I'm really anxious to get into the weekend like everyone else.
Oh yeah, definitely. I have a fun weekend ahead, so I feel the same way.
Great.
So we usually open this podcast with some kind of icebreaker question just to warm us both up a little bit and get to know you a little bit. In your bio, it says, and I quote, "You liken your robust process to jazz." As a music lover myself, that intrigued me. So tell me about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I said that years ago. And the older I get, the more experience I gain, the more it resonates with me and becomes more a part of the process that we have in the studio. And really what it was initially about was this idea that is taught to you in architecture school, right out of the gate. The thing that you're taught is this idea of the singular creative vision of a single person. And I've always felt like design and architecture is so much more of a team sport. It takes so many people, it takes that village to get any project done. And so I've always tried to, as a design process, think of it like jazz, because the projects become richer the way that jazz becomes richer when you have somebody sitting in on a session. Louis Armstrong comes in and lays down a track and then people respond to it. And so for me, architecture is about bringing people to the table, listening to the ideas, and then it becomes that collaborative effort of riffing on one another to come to this end result, this design. And, I think within the works that we do, there is tendencies, and you certainly do recognize Louis Armstrong when he comes and sits in on a session, and we want there to be these threads through the work. But in reality, each project should have a life of its own and a personality of its own. And the final work should be an expression of that effort of all those people that came together to make a thing possible. And that's why that jazz metaphor is such an important thing for me, because to me, it's more representative of what we really do.
I love that answer, because I've worked in construction, mostly architecture, and also engineering twice. And I've always been so frustrated at how siloed the different disciplines can get sometimes. And this building's not going to happen without everybody bringing their expertise to the table.
Yeah.
And I think we could be doing a better job. And I think we are moving that direction more so these days than back maybe 5 years ago when I started my career. That was a joke. But I do think we are doing better now. And I think the younger people coming up are far more open to that more collaborative process than maybe it might have been 20 or 30 years ago.
I think that it's really important as studio leaders and design leaders that it's not just that we're looking for people that are seeking it, it's that we're encouraging it. Because, some of us don't have any problem being loud, but other people tend to be more reserved, or just they don't have that confidence yet. So if you create that environment where all right, we're in the basement, we're just jamming together, everyone just feel comfortable. If you create that environment, really great things can happen. And so I do think it is changing, but I think it's a generational shift. And I think a lot of my peers and similar generation are thinking of it in this way, that how do we create this environment where we can be really creative with others? And I think that that's a great thing in society and in the work that we're doing.
Well, the key thing there is change comes from the top down. And if you lead by example, and that's the kind of environment you create in your firm from the leaders of firms, everybody else is going to follow that. It's just a natural order of the world. So I applaud that. I really do. I applaud that answer and that mindset in ways you couldn't even imagine. Let's start talking about this project. So let's start with a little background. Tell me about the Vista Del Mar organization and their history.
Well, where to begin? Vista Del Mar, I believe, was founded in 1908 as a Jewish orphanage. And since that time, over 117, 118 years, they've really grown in their mission to be about children and families from the full socioeconomic and behavioral spectrum. And so, since completing this project, we've gone on to learn a lot more about the institution and help out on a lot of different things. We're currently working on a dormitory and a supportive services program for kids that have substance abuse programs, teenagers. And so really, they're working with the people that are most at need in society. And it's not just kids, it's families, they're teaching, and really the work they're doing is quite incredible. And so we feel very honored to have been a part of the Kaufman Performing Arts Center, but also for the other work that we're doing with them now, doing strategic planning, helping to write grants, and really expand what their capacities are through improving the built environment on campus.
So what drove the need for this Performing Arts Center, and who is Glorya Kaufman?
Well, what drove the need for it was a lot of research that the workers on campus were doing into how they can reach kids with autism through teaching in the arts. And so what they'd found is that through setting up a creative arts environment, theater, dance, music, performance, they could reach kids with autism and teach them arithmetic and writing skills in a completely different way. And so really the idea of the building came from this idea that the arts can wake up other things inside these kids and enable them to teach them and reach them in different ways. And so the team at Vista Del Mar had reached out to Glorya Kaufman, who is an incredible woman and philanthropist that has done a tremendous amount to support not just the arts, but families, kids, students at her program at USC. And so her mission really arose out of the death of her husband in the late 80s. He tragically died in a plane crash, and she was left devastated but with this tremendous amount of wealth. And she decided initially that she was going to build this library as a lasting sort of testament to Don and who he was and the things that he believed in. And through building this library in Brentwood, she found that she could have this incredible impact on society. And from that, it's really driven her in the second half of her life to do as much as she can to impact kids and families. And the causes she's involved in are really incredible. She's most known for the work that she's doing in the arts and specifically dance. But I got to tell you, she's doing a lot more that people don't know about. But they came to her because of her background in dance. And because dance is a very important part of these programs for reaching kids with autism, she was really the natural partner for the project. And so in both cases with Vista Del Mar and Glorya Kaufman, it's hard to explain who they are because the impact of what they're doing is so much greater than you can explain in just a little quick soundbite. And so it really is a perfect combination of two missions to impact kids and families.
I have to say that when I started reading about this project, it hits a very, very personal chord for me. And having a family member who is on the spectrum and who struggled all the way through the public school system in getting appropriate services for teaching, rather, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole never works. And he is an amazing young man and so smart. And so when I see projects like this that are really trying to fit the building to the child or the program to the child, often I will try not to cry this episode, but often gets me a little choked up. So I understand that this center is a remodel in addition to a 1950s era temple. Tell me a little bit about that and what you were able to keep of the old structure.
Well, the original building on campus, it was built as a temple in the 1950s, but much like a lot of the buildings on this campus, it's had a lot of different lives. It was a temple. It was the campus auditorium. For a time, it was the cafeteria. And there was a fire in the cafeteria that was sort of partially repaired. The lower portion of the building was the library on campus. And so it really, because it's in the exact center of campus, it became this catch-all because it was, kind of equidistant to all the edges. And so when they knew they wanted this performing arts portion of the project, it was the natural building for it because the temple space, it was a 40-foot high volume. It had a stage in it. It had raked seating, and there were some problems with it, but it was really underutilized and in real need of some TLC. And so, we started out, thinking, all right, we're going to work with this building, and we did a lot of analysis that led us to what was ultimately the design of the project. But it really, I think, more than what it was as a physical object, it was envisioned as this catalyst for the campus. It is, like I said, right in the center of campus. There's a lot of buildings that were in a bad state of disrepair. And really, the sort of unwritten program piece of what we were doing is that they wanted to prove that they could do something really impactful on campus to be a catalyst for a lot of change that they wanted to do to other buildings. And it's incredible now, a few years on from the completion of the project, to see that catalyst did happen, that people are now seeing that the vision of the team at Vista and Glorya Kaufman had is inspiring others, and it's bringing in some really incredible people that are going to be helping out on campus. So it's a long way of saying that it started as a temple, but it's had a lot of different lives, including the lives we have for it today.
So having a family member who is on the spectrum, I was very interested when I read that Vista Del Mar has an innovative therapeutic performing arts program. Broadly, tell me about that and how it influenced the design of this building.
Well, it was everything. So much like you, I have a nephew that is on the spectrum, and he's always struggled to school, just like your family member. But I think the bigger thing with him is he struggled for people to understand the struggle that he's going through. People see him in a certain way, and independent of how they see him on the outside, he feels very different on the inside. And his issues were of expression of who he is, and for people to understand that there's something different inside of him. And to me, that metaphor became everything for the project. And while I talk a lot about the manifestation of that in the Martha Graham dance piece, Lamentation, which is, a dancer within a garment. The dancer is completely covered, but you see the movements of this dancer on this fabric, and that expression of the tension and the compression in that material is what people see in the dance. But to me, it's more interesting what is going on the inside with the people. And that to me was everything. Like, how do we capture that idea of what my nephew had said, but also what Martha Graham was trying to express with that dance piece in a piece of architecture. And so those programs about reaching kids through the arts is certainly what it is programmatically, but metaphorically, to me, it was about like, how do we capture this? How do we make this for the kids that it's going to impact, and tell a story that they maybe struggle to tell themselves? And so it's a really important project for me, not just as a piece in the portfolio, but just like emotionally and family connection, and so an impact to a lot of different kids is there's just a lot to this project that goes beyond a building for me.
I would love to see it.
Well,
My nephew, so
yeah.
That's amazing. So tell me about the design vision. You've got this building, this old building. What was your vision? What kind of spaces were you going to create in this building?
So I think it's really what I was just saying, is that it for me, from a design basis, it was about the expression of what that experience is like to be a child with autism. How do we create something that has a legibility on the exterior that is sort of masking something that is very different and unique on the inside? And really, I think programmatically is creating a space where kids feel very safe and welcome. The exterior of the building was designed to be very quiet, to give some gesture to what might be happening behind this veil. But then as you move into the interior spaces, it's a very different experience. It's really about being nurturing and warm and becoming this safe, quiet space for kids. And I think that ties to a lot of things that we were talking about programmatically for the building. But more than anything, it was that expression. And when we talk to the kids on campus, it's really about this quiet thing to the outside, and what people see on the outside may not be the same thing that's on the inside, which is more important. And so that was really the metaphor from a design perspective.
And really probably somewhat true for every human. If you take the time to get past that veil or that wall or whatever a particular person has, you often, if you take that time, often find some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, and I think that's why that story's resonated with so many people, because I think we all feel that at times in our life. But I think it's especially important for the kids with autism, because I think that is the struggle that they have every day, that people aren't understanding me. Right. And so, I think the story resonates, but it really came out of, that sort of desire and that desire to have that expression architecturally.
Well, I'm sure anybody who listens to this episode is going to maybe look at the next kid on the spectrum that they meet, or person, period, a little bit differently, maybe with a little bit different lens, that maybe there's more I need to discover. I hope so. What would you say the biggest design challenge was for this building?
Well, I think the biggest design challenge was programmatically, we had a lot to try to accomplish in a very small building. So the project's just over 10,000 square feet. But in addition to being a place that teaches kids, it's also intended to be a place that generates revenue for the nonprofit. So by day, it's a teaching facility. There's classrooms. The kids are in there learning performing arts and also the other core curriculum things. And then at night, it's used for performance. And so those performances through ticket sales are going to directly benefit all the programs that Vista Del Mar has. And so those two things, you've now got a teaching building, a classroom building, and a performing arts venue in 10,000 square feet. And so really early on, we realized that everything was going to have multiple uses. So every classroom is also a green room or a rehearsal space. Every stage room also holds all the things for the high holidays. And so it really was, how do you get two program elements out of one space? And that really was one of, I think, the biggest challenges, was just how do you fit it all in? And then the other piece was just with the physical sort of space. How do you work within this envelope that you've got that wasn't envisioned as a building like this? And so, it was super challenging in that way to fit it all in, and knowing how important it was that we get all those things in. And that was always, unlike a lot of other projects, how important the impact of it was always there. You felt it start to finish on the job.
So I didn't warn you in advance that sometimes I throw curveballs, so you're welcome to tell me.
Well, I'm a by training, so we're good to go with curveballs.
Great. So can you tell me about like one unique thing or one or two unique things you did in one or more of these spaces to, make it different because it has to accommodate more than one use?
Well, I think that the biggest thing with spaces that have different utility, spaces that can be used in different ways, is actually the absence of the things you think you should put in. I think there's a tendency to want to, all right, a classroom has all these things, a rehearsal space has all these things, and then to try to like combine too much. Because in reality, you need a space that has good light, it's open, and with, this is a lesson really from the staff at Vista Del Mar. They're so used to making do with so little that you realize, let's focus on the things that are really important. And so that was the space. Natural light, good acoustics, those things make it so a space can be used for a lot of different things and have a lot of different lives over the course of, a building's lifespan. Things like cabinets, dividing walls, those things can be added later, but you only get one chance to make a really impactful, high quality space. And so that's what we were really focused on, is really good, versatile space.
I'm a big fan in less is more anyway, even just in my own life. I'm not a real fan of busy or cram packed and tons of stuff. So I can appreciate that.
It's also, and sorry to interrupt, but it's also very important for the kids with autism as well, that maintaining focus means being in a space where there's not so much distraction. And that's visual, that's audible, that's a lot of different things. And so while programmatically you might feel like you need to add a lot of things, for the kids, that less is more helps them. And so that, it really, as a minimalist person, it really worked well with what we were trying to achieve for the kids, which is really quiet space where they could focus and learn.
I know when my nephew was younger, sound was a really big deal. A really big deal. He's he's 21 now. I can't believe he's 21, um, and doing great. But, when they're younger, they don't know how to process all those feelings and communicate things as well. And that's where I first learned how much of an issue sound can be. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Let's get into more specifics about this building. So let's start with the site. What did you have to work with on this site, and did it pose any challenges to what you were trying to do with this building? If so, how did you navigate that?
Well, I think so. The building, as we talked about, it was built in the 1950s, and there's always a challenge when you're renovating a building from that era because the building codes have changed so much, and especially with our seismic codes and the structural things we have to do with buildings now. So we knew there were going to be those challenges of, how do you build a performance space in a building that you couldn't build that way today and have an assembly occupancy in it. But the biggest challenge we had was actually the building's orientation. The building consisted of two masses, which was the tall mass, which had the worship space in it, and that faced away from the second mass, which was down a steep hill that housed classrooms and the library space. And so for a performing arts venue, you need your stage side, the low side of the theater, to open up into all your back house spaces. You need performers to be able to move in. You need to be able to move stage elements onto the stage. And because the building faced away from the other part of the building, it was never really going to work in the way you need a performing arts venue to work, because people would have to essentially come from the outside and in, and then you have light bleed and all these things. And so very early on, we determined that because we had the volume, because of the mass of the worship space was so big, we could take out the floor. We could take over the attic space, or the basement space, if you will, underneath the stage, and change the orientation of that main space. And so by doing that, by changing the orientation, we were able to put the stage to the back side of the building where we had all of the other program space. And so those classrooms, the green rooms, the rehearsal spaces now had direct access onto that stage. And so through that simple move of tearing out a floor and making a rotation within the space, we turned a building that was going to really struggle functionally into something that was quite successful from an operational standpoint. And so again, because they want to have professional performances there to generate funds for the nonprofit, that function is critical for a professional dance company or theater group to be able to come in and operate the way that they've been rehearsing in other spaces. And so I think that was our biggest site challenge. And then the other technical parts really were things we knew we were going to have to contend with, because I've done a lot of renovations over the years, especially these post-World War II buildings, wood-built buildings that you kind of knew what you were going to get into. There was going to be some dry rot, there was going to be some cracked foundations, and some termite damage. And so, it's those were the kind of common things. We found some other problems once we did the demolition that we had to contend with, but you work your way through it. But I think the biggest thing is that we found a way to make the building really functional.
So you triggered another curveball. You're in California, and I probably said this before, I don't know how many times on the podcast when I'm interviewing somebody from California. California is like, in my opinion, when it comes to working with building departments and authorities having jurisdictions and codes, it's like working on Mars. It's different than anywhere else. What were the challenges in getting this? This is a pretty drastic change from an older building, and the laws are much stricter in California than a lot of places. I'm in Oregon, so ours are pretty strict too, but still not to the level of California. What were the challenges in getting this permitted and approved?
Well, here's my curveball before I answer that question. I'm also from Oregon. And so
Oh,
I went the opposite direction as you, from Oregon to California. So that's why I think why we were getting along so early on in our conversation. Oregonians, there's always that.
coolest on the planet.
I mean, goes without saying, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, in the Oregon building code, we see that it's a little more relaxed, but in California, we have some really strict rules, and I think rightfully so. It is a high seismic zone, Oregon as well, but with the wood buildings, they're really flexible. So especially a building like this, it's been around for a long time, so it could weather many of the earthquakes and things that we've had over the years. But once you transform it enough, they start to make you bring it up to code. And we had a really sound plan for that. And like anything, your plan's only as good as once you start demolition. And our biggest challenge was that after we got into the demolition and we started to look at the interior foundations that we couldn't investigate prior to starting construction, we realized that they were way substandard. And so, a few months into the construction process, we had to make an assessment of the foundations we had and determine that it's just going to be easier to completely remove them and rebuild them to current code. And that is, I think, as somebody that's worked in California most of my career, you learn that threshold at which trying to preserve something is now becoming cost prohibitive, or it's making it so the design isn't going to be as successful. And so that was really, I think, our biggest challenge, is that while we had a lot of planning, we did a lot of investigation, there were things we couldn't see that we had to contend with later. At the end of the day, as California, I think from the outside looks really strict, but it's like any system. Once you learn it, it's the system you work within. So yeah, it was tricky getting an old wood building to meet current codes, but we had a good engineering team, good team across the board, and you worked your way through it. And luckily, we had a really good client that understood these things happen. And we had a smart construction management team. We had lots of contingency in the budget in case we ran into these things as we were doing the renovation. And so not really California related, but that was, I think our biggest code issue is once we got in there and found out it was just not as good as we'd expected.
This is my second firm that I've worked for that has an office in California. And so I've actually done a fair amount of public work in California. If you can do that, you can work anywhere. So I have the California public contracting rules on my shelf behind me. So I think that's what I find to be the most difficult thing to work on in California, is complying with all of the public contracting rules. So I'm now that I work for an enclosure consultant, I'm really particularly interested in this next question. I don't know that I've ever heard the words polycarbonate facade before. I read that and I'm like, seriously, I was like, what the hell is that? And I had to go look it up and look at your pictures. Tell me about this semi-translucent facade. I want all the details.
Well, you're not the only one that hadn't heard of it before meeting me. There was a lot of education that went into us understanding how to best utilize it, but also walking our client through what it was. When you go into a presentation and you say, we're going to make the building out of plastic, the reaction is not always great. And so, it took a lot of education of our client and the stakeholders on the project, but it also, it was something that footed the bill for what we needed to do. So to my comment previously about the foundations, because we knew that the existing foundations weren't going to be great, we wanted a building material that was going to be really light. And so we'd initially looked at channel glass as a way to create the same effect, the visual effect of the filtered light with the rhythmic columns behind it. But the channel glass is really heavy. And so just through research, we came across this product, which is, it's a cellular plastic wall, if you will, that's about a little over 2 inches thick. And it has really good thermal performance because it's plastic. It's not radiating a lot of heat through, and the cellular nature of it means it performs really well acoustically, but also thermally. And the acoustic part was really important for some of the things we talked about previously, that, glass makes a space really live, and you get a lot of reverb off of it. The plastic was very deadening, so it worked really well as classroom space, rehearsal space, and then we had that weight component to it. And so it's a really simple system that is 2 horizontal tube steel bars with an L bracket on it. And those L brackets just clipped into the channel of these cellular plastic panels that were the full height of the facade. So they were 14 feet tall, and they linked together like puzzle pieces. And the thing that was really incredible about it is, with a glass curtain wall, that install process can take weeks. And that's with lots of preparation and all the problems that go into the assembly of a curtain wall. This plastic facade was installed in 2 days. And it was installed about the same cost as the stucco on the project. And so really, when we're making determinations about the materials we want to use, first is, does it meet the aesthetic and programmatic requirements that we're after? And then it's cost, and it's all the practical pieces. And so the polycarbonate facade really was the natural thing to use, because it solved so many of the issues we were trying to deal with. And so it's a really neat system. We built a really great relationship with X-Tech, who is the company that helped us on the detailing of it. And we've used it since, and we'll continue to use it, because it really is a pretty unique material that is much more common in the European market, but hasn't been as utilized in the US. And especially in a climate like Los Angeles, where everyone is so worried about the UV stability of things because of all the light. It again took that education, but it really is a great material. And I think for me, programmatically, it worked really well, but the visual effect of it is really more than we'd ever hoped for. Every time you go to campus, the building appears different. And the way that it plays with light has so much to do about how it captures what's going on in the sky, the reflection of clouds, the way light filters in and out depending day and night. And so, yeah, it was the perfect choice for this project, and certainly would recommend it to anyone that is curious to look at it.
It looks fantastic. And I got a couple more questions about that before we go to the next one. First one is, I imagine it was a fairly substantial cost savings over, say, a glass curtain wall system, both in installation and materials, which I would guess gave you a lot more money to do other things on the project that you wanted to. Is that the case?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. It went in, like I said, about the cost of the stucco, which is considered one of the cheaper building materials that you can utilize, especially in Southern California. But I think the biggest thing goes, again, to the conversation before, is that the most important thing that we needed to do was get this building built for the kids. And so the compromises we were making were always about program space. It was about square footage. The square footage to be utilized was way more important than any design detail or any material choice that we made. And so again, just kind of, that was always top of mind.
And I will be sending a link of this episode to everybody in my firm. How does that type of facade weather? That's just my own pure curiosity. How does that stand up over time?
Well, we're going to find out.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it then.
So we completed the project in 2021. It looks exactly the same today. So that's 3 years on. The warranties are very similar to most window systems that you would purchase. Big commercial window systems, some of which we used in the building. So the warranties were really good. And what we're told is that the UV data on it is actually, it performs better than the UV data. And so we're on campus all the time. We're certainly watching it. So far, the only maintenance that's been needed on it is hosing it down every couple of months. And that's honestly, compared to the window washing you have to do with the glass curtain wall system, it's taken very little. They have the pressure washer they roll out, and it takes an afternoon to do it, and the plants get watered a little bit as they they wash the facade. But it's from a maintenance perspective and a life cycle perspective, it's been really great. And I think that's the other piece of it, is that this is post-consumer material and it's 100% recyclable. So when it does get to the end of its lifespan, take the facade off and recycle it. And I know glass is recyclable as well, but I think if you look at the carbon difference between the glass facades and the plastic polycarbonate facade, it performs really well from a life cycle perspective as well.
I'm totally fascinated with that. I will be doing some spec writer research later today. Well, and you said a key thing there that I think sometimes in our business we can get so focused on the design that sometimes we don't think as much as we should about maintenance costs for that client. And for a nonprofit, that's always going to be a big deal. And having done at a previous firm public work, mainly schools, for years, that was always front of mind for schools, is not just picking a great material, but also something that was affordable for them to maintain over the long term. And so they have to love being able to just go out with a pressure washer and building looks like it just got painted. It looks brand new. So tell me a little bit about these rhythmic columns. What was the inspiration behind the rhythmic columns that you have behind this facade? And what look were you trying to achieve?
Well, because the project had a performing arts focus, we, from the very beginning, wanted it to have a rhythmic feel to the design. We wanted there to be this performance aspect to the architecture. So we built all throughout the project, both in the rhythmic columns, the slat ceiling in the main performance space, and even through some of the patterning of floor materials, we wanted to always feel like it was a dance, that there was this rhythm to the work. And really, it kind of goes to your first question, is that music is a really important part of my life. And so I talk about design in musical terms a lot. I'm a terrible musician, but I love music. And so to me, that's also part of the reason I've always been drawn to the performing arts projects, is because it's such an important part of my own life that there's so much more you can draw from your life experience and the way that you view the world and the metaphor that you can bring to it. And so the rhythmic columns really was about that expression. And then behind the veil of the polycarbonate, again, it was about masking, we didn't want there to be this pure legibility of the structural system of the building, the way that we were supporting things. And so those rhythmic columns enabled us to control light into spaces, creating density of columns in places where we didn't want a lot of natural light, and then letting it open up into spaces where we wanted a lot of natural light. And so again, much like everything else on this project, it was, how do we solve two things with one design element? And so that rhythmic device enabled us to do a lot, including creating a little bit of visual complexity on the facade.
I love that it, everybody sees a design differently, but for me, it's also, that digging in, finding out what's underneath, that taking the time to go beyond that exterior. That's kind of the impression I get from that more than anything else, but it's beautiful. I mean, when I saw that polycarbonate facade, I'm like, wait, isn't that plastic? What? I have to go. That can't be. I can't be reading that right. I had to go look it up, thinking I was missing something. But Before we move to the inside of the building, are there any other features of the building exterior that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I think that the biggest thing that we were able to achieve outside of the actual building was bringing program to the exterior of the building as well. We talked early on about every space is an opportunity for performance. The building is split between two levels. There's about 12 feet of grade change between the lower levels and the upper lobby level. And so we wanted every stair, every plaza, every planter to define a place where people could do performance. And the thing that's been really incredible is that when I go to performances at the space, the director, Sarah Silken, has found really unique ways to do performance within the building in ways that I never would have anticipated. And to me, that's the incredible thing about being an architect is we have a vision for how things are used, but then the people come in, they occupy it, and then they find these really interesting ways to utilize it that you'd never thought of that are super engaging. I saw a dance piece done in the main feature stairwell where they stood on a soffit and did this really precarious dance that made me very nervous about somebody falling. But it was incredible because what she saw was this opportunity to have an experience inside the building where people in the lobby could see this dance performance. But on the outside of the building, you saw these dancers in silhouette with the light bleeding through. And to me, I would have never thought to stage a thing in that way, but it was utilizing the building in this really rich way that that took advantage of the architectural decisions that were made for these veils and these columns and these double height spaces. And so while we thought about performance everywhere, they found ways to expand upon that. And I saw a dance on a roof one time, which we probably also shouldn't talk about on in a public forum, but they're using it in really rich ways. And so I'm glad that they've seen beyond our vision and have so much more vision for how to use it into the future.
I would imagine for you, by going back to your project and actually experiencing your project in the way that they use it, that I would think if that was me, that I'd be going, wow, I never would have expected them to use that way. If I design something else like this, I might do this or I might do that. That has to expand your horizons to take the time to go and see how they're not just, get them moved in and move on to the next project, but actually go see the innovative ways they use it. Do you think that will inform future design for you by seeing the difference from your original vision and some of the extra things they did that you didn't anticipate?
100%. Yeah. I mean, they inspire me every time I go there. And it makes you think about the things that you do in different ways. And I think it's really important as architects that we visit the buildings that we've designed after the fact and we have those conversations, because I probably shouldn't admit this again in a public forum, but not everything was perfect. But you learn from it, little things like it would have been much nicer if the light switches in this space were on this other side of the door because we come in this way, or just like little knowledge that you can gain just by talking to the people that use a building is really, really important. And I think it's something that we encourage our staff to do, to have those conversations. Even when they're complaints, it's important to learn from it. And so in our studio, we do a thing at the end of every job, which is lessons learned. And so we get the whole entire staff together and we talk about the things that we learned, both from positive lessons, but also from negative things. And by sharing that information, we think that we're taking, individual knowledge and creating institutional knowledge. So we're all learning from all the projects of the studio, not just the ones that we are individually working on. And so, I've learned a ton on this project. And you learn a ton on every project if you're open to that ability to see and to learn from things. And I love it. That's why I love working on so many different types of buildings, because every day you're learning something new. And I think that's part of the reason I love architecture, is that it's so complex and it's always changing. You're never going to know it all, but that is an awesome thing. To get to work in a profession where everything is so difficult and complicated, it's really intellectually engaging, and it's problem solving that is really rewarding when you are presented with something that is really super complicated, and then you come up with that solution and you are lucky enough to execute it in a beautiful way. I mean, that's a really rewarding thing, and one of the many reasons I love doing what I do.
Lessons learned, if you haven't figured it out from this podcast, is part of my DNA. I mean, that's my favorite part. And I'll tell you something, while you may not think you should be saying it on a public forum, if I was going out and hiring an architect, I would want to hire the architect that says, not everything is perfect. I've been around for more years than I'm going to admit to, and I've never seen a project where everything was perfect. And, you know, it's the same. I talk about this all the time in working with manufacturers reps. I want to work with the manufacturers reps that tell me, hey, Cherise, you might not want my product on this particular project, but call me on the next one. That's who I'm going to call every time. You know, the truth hurts, but this is a lifelong learning business. And the minute you think you know everything, you should get out of the business, because you are then a deficit, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Maybe I shouldn't say that out loud. Some architect's going to come burn me at the stake. Let's talk.
You're in safe company.
Okay, good. Yeah, until this gets released.
That's what or we can bury that.
Yeah. No, they won't edit it out. They love it when I do stuff like that. Let's move inside the building. Projects of this type typically have many unique spaces. We've been talking about some of those and unique requirements. Just broadly describe for me some of the different spaces inside this building.
Well, I think, I touched on it a little bit before, that programmatically, each of the spaces sort of serves dual function: classroom, green room, those kind of things. I think one of the more unique spaces that we built for the project, which was a real challenge, was that because the building was a temple initially, there were these really beautiful stained glass windows that were in the building that we wanted to preserve. And so the main one, we knew that we wanted to take down, restore it, backlight it, and that hangs in the main lobby. But the smaller windows were in pretty bad disrepair. And so we took the windows down, we found a stained glass window specialist, and then we partially disassembled the windows and then reassembled them into compositions that are displayed throughout the building. But for high holidays and religious events, they wanted the ability to bring those stained glass windows into the building, or into the performance space, onto the stage. So we built a special room that those stained glass windows live within, and then they cart out onto the stage, and then there's an internal illumination. So on a high holiday performance, it's backlit with those stained glass windows. And so that was a space that I never thought I would do, a room for stained glass windows. But another like really interesting lesson into not just the restoration of something, but also how to preserve a window like that in an interior setting, but also in the significance of the iconography of those windows and what it meant for the people of the Jewish faith that use that space for high holidays.
I love that. I did an interview, probably last year sometime, on an old church in New York, and just a couple of them actually, and I heard some really interesting stories about stained glass windows and preserving and what you have to go through to preserve old stained glass windows. But this is a first. Never heard of a stained glass window room and displaying them inside the building. I think that's a lovely way I love stained glass windows for one thing, but it's a lovely way to keep that piece even when you have to take it out of the windows. So I'm going to go back and look through all your pictures and see if you've got a picture in there that I can look at, because I don't remember seeing that.
I'll send you some photos.
So we've been talking about acoustics, and how that aids those with the sound sensitivity. How do you do that? And the other part of that question is, why is it important? I think we've pretty much already covered why it's important, but how do you approach acoustics from a design standpoint in a building where sound sensitivity is far more important than it might be in a lot of other types of buildings?
Well, I think that the biggest thing so there were two challenges as it related to acoustics. One was what we've talked about having quiet spaces, but the other challenge was that this building sits right on the 10 freeway, and so we actually had a bigger concern about noise from the outside bleeding into the performance space, which is again a building from the 1950s. It was built out of 2x4s, and so there were a number of challenges. Chief among them was that sound can't get in. So mass is the way you stop sound from coming through walls. Mass is, that weight is hard to contend with, again, with a really old wood building. And so we were really strategic about how we added mass in the form of drywall to the main performance space. And that created that barrier with some air gaps between the multiple layers of drywall. And then for the performance space based noise, we have an acoustical ceiling. It's a wood slat ceiling that the wood absorbs a lot of the sound, but it deadens the space. That way, again, we're not having a lot of reverb for different types of performance. And so it was really that game of the mass to stop noise from the outside and those slats to control the reverberation of sound in the main performance space. It was a little tricky in that for dance performances, you want the space to be a little bit more live, especially for things like tap dance. You want to hear those footsteps. But broadly speaking, that space is used as, it's the campus auditorium. They're doing spoken word. They're doing theatrical performances. So we had to pick a spot in the middle where the space worked for the broadest sort of spectrum of things. And so it is a very quiet space. It is not kind of a traditional dance space where you hear a lot of that bounce back, but it was a big challenge in a space that was that old and built the way that it was with a freeway next to it.
I didn't know about the freeway part. You just you threw a curveball right back at me. Tell me a little bit about some of the finishes and color palettes that you chose for the interior.
So the majority of the spaces, the teaching spaces, the lobby spaces, those are all really muted. White tones, it's white walls and white terrazzo floors. And again, we wanted those spaces to be really visually quiet. So the focus is on the teaching, the rehearsal. It really is intended to be as visually simple as possible. But then when you come into the main performance space, because we always envision that as the campus living room, we wanted it to be warm. We wanted it to be a space that felt comfortable. It exuded those characteristics we talked about before, about this special thing to the inside of this building. And so it really is about that juxtaposition of the quiet, cool, calm tones, and then this really rich, warm, inviting space. And while I don't have data to support it, you see the kids up there when they're performing, they feel at home. There's a lot of anxiety that comes to everyone stepping onto a stage, and so we wanted it to feel like, no, you're just home. This is your living room. You can be calm, you can be relaxed, and so that's really where the palette came from.
Well, and a space can make you feel that way. I experience it every time I walk into any space. Whether it's, I don't know, maybe I pay more attention than some people, but I am immediately affected at some kind of emotional level when I walk into a space. It either makes me feel really comfortable and at home and relaxed, or it's stiff and tight and uninviting, and that does affect how you are going to behave in that space, no matter who you are. And so I love that you put that kind of effort into it. So Speaking of materials, you had mentioned in your project description, and we've talked about it a little bit, that you had a very conservative budget. And so I'm curious how you reconcile the conservative budget, because performing arts centers are, no matter what kind they are, typically they try to make a statement, and you've done that. You know, I'm eyeballing that fabulous theater. I took one look at that and I'm like, conservative budget, baloney. It does not look like you had a conservative budget when you look at that theater. So tell me how you reconciled that and got it to be the space that it is, that not just a theater, but the whole space, to with a conservative budget when it doesn't look like it was a conservative budget.
Well, I take that as a very sincere compliment that it looks like it was not inexpensive. It means that we were very successful in our thinking of where we prioritize putting money. But it's really two things. It's one, every decision has to be balanced with the cost impact of it. And you just have to think that way, especially in a time where construction costs are as high as they are. You have to be aware of that in your decision making. But how you get a building like this built is that you're solving two problems with every solution. And if you are like, all right, problem, solution, it's going to add up. So you look at it and you say, all right, we have these two problems. How do we solve those together? How do we come up with something that gets us what we need? It eliminates one other thing that we have to add to the project. And that's how we think about most of our work. It's identify the issues, the problems, those things up front, and then go straight at them. And if you're focused on the challenges up front, you start to see those challenges grouped together in your decision making. And that's just really fundamental to how I, in my studio, approaches problem solving. And I wish I had a magic bullet description of how you tackle it. It's really just kind of that simple. It's always in your mind. And I think it comes from, most of my early projects. I started out doing really modest renovations, like we have an 8-year-old and we have a 12-year-old, and they're getting to the age where they need to have their own bedrooms. Like, how do we stretch our dollars to get another bedroom for our soon-to-be teenager? And the thinking from those projects, as simple and modest as they are, the thinking from those things impacts the decision-making as we're doing more and more complex projects with, substantially larger budgets. In that, the stewardship of your project budget and your client's money is really important to getting things done. And also just creating alignments with people where it's not about your singular vision for what is done. It's about, as a team, we're trying to accomplish this thing, and we're respectful of your budget, we're respectful of your schedule. And if you think like that, you get things done. And I think that, to me, has always been my focus, is building buildings. There are a million different avenues for architecture and the way you can approach it, but I love building buildings. And to get buildings built, you have to think about these things in every decision.
Well, it sounds to me like the perfect combination of experience, common sense, lack of ego, which is, it's sometimes a problem in our industry, and just really valuing those lessons learned and taking them forward in everything you do. Like you said, in your own home. What do you know, and how can we make this happen, and what makes sense? I know you did a fantastic job on that with this project. Sustainability is a big thing on the West Coast, period. Were there any sustainability? I think in California there's even some. I know in Oregon and Washington there are some that are required. Were there any sustainability efforts made on this project? Were you able to?
It was another thing that, much like schedule and budget, to me, thinking about sustainability it's integral to design thinking. I mean, as a fellow Oregonian, I grew up in a place where the environment and environmentalism was part of the discourse my entire life. I mean, recycling cans was there when I was a kid. And so I was always thinking about these things. And I think that's a part of me that coming from the Pacific Northwest. But I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to me that people talk about their firms as I'm a sustainable design firm. Sustainability and environmental design is part of what we do. And if you're not talking about it, if you're not thinking about it, you are missing out on a big issue in our world, maybe the biggest issue that we have to contend with. And so again, it is part of every decision. And it's the materiality of something like the polycarbonate. It's recyclable. There's that piece of it. But I think the single biggest impact thing we did on this project was preserving the main worship space, the main theater space. We could have demolished it. We did studies that it was going to be very close in the cost impact to demolish versus preserve. But by preserving it, the tipping point on that was that to preserve it, it was conserving about, I think it was 100 metric tons of carbon on site. And so those are materials that we didn't have to fabricate, ship, install. And, these are from, trees and different resources. And so thinking like that, saying, all right, the site is more than the existing conditions of the topography. It is the things that are there. And the thing that was there was this building that had utility left in it. And if you have the vision to see that it might not be perfect if we utilize it, and there's certainly compromises that had to be made to preserve it. But if you think like that, 100 metric tons of carbon, that is an impact that I think that we're overlooking too much, that we should be looking at every project as an opportunity for adaptive reuse. And in a city like Los Angeles, where most of the sites have something on it, we need to be encouraging it. We need to be talking about it. And we need to be more understanding about it's okay to make compromises in the design of something or the vision of something because it is giving us this environmental offset. And so, materiality, things that are capturing carbon, those are super important material choices to make. But the most sustainable decision I think you can make is, can we just keep what's here? Can we get more lifespan out of the thing that is already on site? And so sustainability is super important. And I think that we did a lot on this project just with preserving what we had.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've noticed just from doing the podcast, I've had a couple of guests recently that did some pretty substantial adaptive reuse projects. One guest called it radical reuse, which I loved. But I don't think enough of us yet in the industry are thinking about that value that you can get from keeping what's there, as far as as it relates to sustainability. And I mean, look at what you did with this building. That's a lot. People are always thinking about putting in a better heating system or a better water system, or I'll look for products that aren't on the red list. But there's some serious value there. And with construction getting as expensive as it is, sometimes it is more cost effective to radically reuse what's there rather than start from scratch. So thank you for kind of shining a light on that. I can't ever do an episode without asking a question about construction, because I think sometimes as design professionals, we learn even more from watching our designs, the attempt to build our designs, sometimes the attempt, but the things that happen during construction, because I think that really changes how we look at the next design. Tell me about the construction phase on this project and at least one challenge you encountered and how you solved it during construction.
Oh, this is the easiest question you've asked.
Ah, hey.
We were the first meeting that I had to wear a mask at the beginning of the pandemic was interviewing contractors, and so this project was built 100% through the pandemic, and so it is a testament to the tenacity of the team that it continued to go, because we ran into every obstacle you read about in the paper: supply chain, COVID shutdowns, construction cost escalation. It all hit us. And especially at the very beginning of the project, at a time where we were all pretty scared. I mean, we didn't know how to wear masks at the time. We didn't know how dangerous this was or wasn't. It was a terrifying time, those early weeks of the pandemic. Now, the commute to the job site was much faster at the beginning of the job than the end of the job. But that was, I think, our biggest challenge, that we fighting through the pandemic and just being so unwilling to just like give up was really, I think, the biggest thing for me. One of our core principles in the office, our core values, is tenacity. And I think that the tenacity it took in that time period to get things built really is the thing that I'm maybe most proud of as far as a construction project, because it was a challenge. Everything after that seems like it's going to be easy. And I know that's a stupid thing to say, but that was, I think, the biggest and I hope the most challenging construction project we go through as a company.
I know my office got really creative with some of the things that we were doing, because I went on a vacation, came home and went to the office, and they said, okay, tomorrow everybody go home. So, well, I'm glad I got Hawaii in, because I'm not going anywhere for a while. But we had people out there doing virtual job walks with the team, where they were walking around with an iPad, pointing it at things and doing their weekly job meeting that way, so that they didn't have people in the same space. I think that there were a lot of good problem solving skills that came from the pandemic, but it was a challenging time. And I really had a lot of respect for the people that really stuck it out and got it done. Rather than, give up and let's put this on hold, because it wasn't easy. And that the supply chain issues and construction costs were ridiculous during that time. You couldn't count on anything. You had a lot of contractors in the country stockpiling, being worried about having it later. And so other contractors couldn't get things. So it was gray hair inducing. So what would you say for this project, your biggest lesson learned was that will make you an even better architect on the next project?
Oh my goodness. It's a really good, hard question. I think, there's so many lessons learned on a project of this scale and importance. I think the biggest lesson for me maybe wasn't a technical lesson. It was an affirmation, or it reaffirmed to me the types of projects that I want to do. And really the reward of getting to be involved in a project like this has set me and our company on a path to really always try to have a focus on projects that have impact on people. And the reward of seeing the kids use the space, use the classroom, do performances for the first time, you can't quantify that, but the power of it can become addictive. And I think much like Glorya Kaufman, she built that first library, and then she saw the return she got on that investment, which is beyond a building. That's what I learned, is that that's real. And so we've become really focused on how do we get more projects that have this impact? How do we make ourselves available to people in the nonprofit world and start to have more impact? And I think, to me, that's really the biggest lesson for me, is that stay focused on the things that are most rewarding for you, and you get the best work out of it too. Like those feelings of the metaphors that drove the design were real, and the impact of them carried through and beyond that project. And so, yeah, I think that to me is just, it set me on a path that it's going to be hard to pull me off of.
I sometimes feel like the universe sends me particular guests on this podcast on purpose. Just it's kindred spirits. So tell me, before we get to our two closing questions, what can we look forward to in the future from Ox Architecture? What are you designing now that I can call you about and say, Brian, come back on the show and tell me about it?
Well, a lot. This project, in addition to being very impactful emotionally for me and impactful for a lot of kids and families, it's opened a lot of doors to other work. We've grown a lot. We're about to complete in the next 2 months actually another project for the Kaufman Foundation, which is another performing arts venue that is on the campus of the Bender Museum in Culver City. And in that project, while Vista Del Mar is really about internal impact and their community on campus, the cultural center that we're doing is really about community and bringing people into this space from the outside. And so it might be an interesting counterpoint to this conversation, because whereas Vista is really about turning in architecturally, this building is about turning out in the expression to the outside. In addition to that, we're doing a lot of affordable housing, arts-based work, cultural work, and we still do a lot of single-family residential. And I will always love that diversity of work and what it enables us to do. And hopefully we get to talk a lot in the future about some of these things.
Oh, we will. You're not going to get rid of me now. Sorry, you're stuck. I always close every episode with two questions. One being a broad industry question beyond the confines of this particular project. So the question for you today is, what would you say is the number one issue facing architecture today, and what do you think we should be doing about it? Well, my questions are easy. They're easy questions.
Well, I'm going to try to answer this one a little bit differently, because I think the biggest challenge is the environment, and we've talked about that a little bit already. So I would say second to the environmental things that we need to be talking about more in the industry and the environmental impact of buildings, I think second to that is a conversation that other industries are having about AI, that I don't think we're having maybe the right conversation yet. The writers here in Los Angeles went through a major strike and loss of work to fight for their rights, and partially the utilization of AI to basically eliminate their jobs, or a number of jobs. I think we need to be having that conversation in architecture too, because the AI platforms are here. It's getting integrated into software that we're already using. But I think that we're not, at least, I just came back from the AIA convention in Washington, D.C., and there were a number of talks that were focused on AI, but most of them were talking about, this tool is going to help you do this. This tool is going to make this faster. To my knowledge, I didn't see one that was, it's also going to eliminate jobs. And the jobs that it eliminates are those entry-level jobs in a lot of ways, but it's also going to be technical skilled positions. And so I don't have the answer to this one. It is beyond me, but I think it is a conversation that we need to have about what is going to be the impact on our workforce, people that are in the profession, people are coming into the profession. And I think that's, broader than architecture, but I think that that's one that is worthy of a deeper discourse, and a discourse that I'd like to see happen more.
That's funny you brought that up, because we can be a little resistant to change sometimes in this industry, depending on what it is. And I was at AIA as well, doing actually some podcasting, not a really a work day job focused trip, but I was at a CSI conference recently in Puerto Rico, and they had a guy come in and talk to us about AI, specifically as it relates to writing specs. And his feedback was, it's not going to be able to do your job because there's so many unique requirements in every building, but that there will be a lot of things. And I haven't jumped into the AI world yet. I'm not resistant to change. I just haven't. Something about it scares me a little bit. There are a lot of other things that it will do. And to your point, nobody's talking about how's that going to change our industry as we have a huge influx of young people coming in to our industry because of our generational imbalance. So I think that's a pretty good concern. I think a lot of people in a lot of industries are concerned to some level, but we aren't talking about it from that perspective. So maybe somebody will hear this and somebody who is an AI expert will come talk to us about it.
Well, let's hope somebody listens.
So yeah, let's hope. So final question, everybody gets this question, another light, easy one. We all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. I know I do. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
Wow, that's another challenging one. I think my hope is that I get to continue to get projects like the Glorya Kaufman Performing Arts Center at Vista Del Mar, because the work that they're doing and the impact they're having is so much. They have so much more reach than we can have as individuals. So I just hope that I get more opportunities to work on projects like that and with organizations that have so much impact. And that really is my goal. And if I get to do that, I'll feel pretty good about my career and the impact of it.
Something tells me I think you'll have that opportunity. Brian, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. This has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. The next time you're in LA, let me know and I'll give you a tour, and look forward to getting to talk to you in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.